Alright everybody, thanks for joining me today on Classic Mini DIY. For today's job, we're going to be replacing the clutch output bearing, which is located inside this, in your clutch cover housing. It's actually attached to this rod here, which actuates your clutch with your slave cylinder here. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is take off some of these auxiliary items. So we're going to take off the ignition coil, we're going to take off the starter, we're also going to take off this arm here, which actuates your clutch. Once we get those items off and kind of out of the way, we'll then be able to start taking out the bolts that hold on your cover. This job is pretty intensive. You're going to need a jack, you're going to need a socket wrench set, as well as a good bit of time to set aside for this. The job can be done with the engine in the car, which we'll be doing today. Although if you have the engine out of the car already, this is something I would recommend doing and replacing before you put it back in the car. It is a little bit frustrating to do while it's in the car, so just keep that in mind. This job is also for a Pre-Verto clutch. It will be a little bit different on a Verto clutch. Your slave cylinder will be in a different location, and the bearing that we're replacing is also different. So just keep that in mind. This is for a Pre-Verto clutch. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm taking off the starter right now, and the starter's just held on by two 9/16 bolts right here, and then one directly opposite this on the bottom. I find that it can be a little bit easier to do this without your grill on. I've got big auxiliary lights on the front of my car, so I don't take the grill off unless I really need to. But it may be easier if you go ahead and take that off while you're working on this. Alright, cool. So the starter is loose, and to get that off, you just kind of pull it out of the hole there. Now the starter doesn't have to go crazy far out of this thing, it's just enough so that it's not inside this area right here anymore. So mine is just offset, you can see the shaft is just right down there. And that is just so this will clear it when we're taking it off. So the next step is to take off the spring here, which is the return spring for your clutch arm. I normally take this off with a pair of needle nose pliers because it's hard as hell to get off, and it likes to just spring and bounce everywhere, and you don't want to hurt yourself. There we go. Return springs off and dropped in the engine bay. Alrighty. Next, you'll see the pin here. Now normally there's a cotter pin on the bottom. I guess the cotter pin fell out that I had in there, but this slides out. That's just a pin. Set that aside and hold on to that. And next, you take this out. Just kind of be nice with your slave cylinder. Alright. And then this actually just pops right out of there, like so. Okay, so the next thing to do is to remove the bolts from your engine mount. There are two bolts, and they pass through your subframe right down here, one on this side and the one right over here, and you're going to need to take those out. You can access them from the wheel bay, from your underneath the fender, and those two bolts might have nuts on this end that'll fall off, so just keep that in mind. Although not all cars are that way, some have captive nuts, mine do. So when I unscrew those bolts, it's just those bolts, and you'll set those aside. It's a good time to take a look at those and make sure they are strong grade 8 bolts or grade 10. You don't want anything weak holding the motor together, or holding the motor onto your car. Alright, so now that those bolts are removed, the next thing you're going to want to do is jack up your motor just a little bit to remove the weight that is holding that cover on. So you'll see I'm just going to put the jack right underneath the sump, just the middle of the bottom of the engine, and just slowly lift it up, and you'll see the motor move ever so slightly. Alright, so now that the motor's lifted, all you have to do is release the bolts that hold on this cover to your flywheel housing. Now, that cover has bolts that go all the way around and underneath on the bottom here. So the bolts on the bottom are very frustrating to get to. You can kind of get to them if you're sort of underneath the car, but at the end of the day, these bolts are just really frustrating to get out. It's going to take some time. Especially the ones located in the back here. So let's go ahead and get to it. Now with the weight off of the motor, you should be able to wiggle this sucker out of here. There we go. Lifts out. And there you have it. So next, we're going to replace the actual bearing, which is this right here. And that was rattling in my car. So we're going to go ahead and take that out and move on to the next step. Alright, so here is the old bearing, and here is our new one. We're going to be replacing that on here. So to do that, we are going to see if I can pry it up. No. Next, we are going to take these nuts off of here. Alright, nut number 2 is off, and this will just slide out. And the wiggle, the rattle, is, you can't hear it too good while the motor's not running, but it is loud when your bearing's all messed up. But it's the wiggle up and down like that. So the next thing to do is to hammer this sucker out. So in my opinion, the best way to do this is to put the pin here, present, and this will act as kind of a holder for it, and get something that you can hammer down on this where you're not going to mess up the pin that's in the middle. Alright, so there we go. Old crappy bearing is off. And then we have our plunger here. Now would be a very good time to look at this plunger and see if you have any wear on this bearing face. If you have any wear here, that will provide extra give while you're actuating your clutch. If you do have wear on this, it's not very expensive to replace and definitely worth it while this cover is off. You can pick that up at 7 Enterprises or any mini parts retailer. I provided some links below for this plunger. I also have links below for this bearing. And other than that, let's go ahead and get this hammered back in here, which this new bearing can go either way. It doesn't matter that it's the same on both sides. Alright, so for this portion of the job, what I normally like to do is I put a nut on this end here. I've got my table vise, and then a nut on this end, which will kind of keep this bearing free to spin, and I slowly tighten my table vise to press that bearing back in. As you're pressing this in, you want to just make sure that keeps spinning free. Alrighty, so there you have it, new bearing. If you want to compare, there's that nice rubber surface on the new one, and then the old worn one here. Both sides are just pretty mangled up and worn out. And then you have your plunger here. So the next step is to go ahead and take this nut back off. That's going to have to go off to get back onto this this housing. Easy way to do that is to toss in a extension there, and then work this out like so. What I like to do on this housing is clean this, the face, all this area around here. Just make sure that there's no debris in this. It's a nice thing to have really nice, clean, lubricated parts. You know, debris can get in this from just regular use. So I clean it out really well and then reapply a nice coat of brand new chassis grease to this. Now I try to only get it on the interior faces. As you can see, I made a little mess on the outside here. But just no need to have crazy amounts of grease on here, just enough to keep all this lubricated. I'll apply another coat to this. Alright, full face of that, nice and lubed up. And go ahead and hit the threads as well, just to make sure those nuts go on really nice and smooth. Okay, so remember the bearing is on the inside of this, and that slides in right there. You're going to need to hold it to get this first nut in. And so to keep this from spinning, I do the same thing I was doing before. I have my extension, I just stick that in here. That'll just help you hold it steady while you screw this nut back on. Alright, so before we put this sucker back on here, let's go ahead and just clean it up. It's covered in all sorts of grease and crap from when we were working on it. Okay, now a little bit of grease on there is okay. Nothing wild and crazy. You don't want to get any grease on, you don't want to get too much grease in your clutch housing, otherwise you might get it on your clutch and then it won't work right. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so let's move back to the car and put the sucker back on there. Alright, so let's get this face back on here. Essentially you just reverse the steps that you already took to put this, or to take the cover off. So we're gonna have to slide it back down in here, being mindful of the starter here, as well as getting it wedged down there nice. And there's a small lip on the face of your, or on the cover, and it notches in underneath your flywheel housing. So let's go ahead and get that done. There we go. Nothing a good old rubber mallet can't solve. Alright, so let's go ahead and start bolting this back up here. Alright, so once you have all of those bolts back in, the next step is to lower the motor back down. Yep, just like that. And line up those holes for the engine bolt mounts to go in. Again, like I said before, now is a good time to check those bolts and make sure that you have strong grade 8 or grade 10 bolts holding that in. The stronger the better. Obviously these are 2 bolts that are vital in holding your motor in place. And if you get down to it, it's only 2 on this side, 2 on the other side, and if you've got a stock setup, 2 right here, above your breather. It's right there. So total 6 bolts really holding your whole motor in place. So it's always good to make sure that these are really strong and in good order. Now, if you can't get these bolts lined up, like I'm having trouble with right now, it's good to have one of these punches around, or something along the lines of this. I would not recommend a screwdriver; they tend to bend. But you can put this through the holes that line up to line up your engine mount to the subframe, and it'll help line up those bolt holes. Great. So now that those are reattached, the next step is to go ahead and put the actuation arm back on. I find that it is easiest to do this kind of at the same time as you're putting this pin into your slave. So that goes back into your slave cylinder. This will fall into the groove. Note if this is not sliding in, it means that the hole on your plunger is not lined up with it. So you just need to rotate your plunger around until you find that hole. Go ahead and take your pin, put that back in here. That pin's back in. Let's go ahead and get this return spring reattached. Alright, return spring reattached. Next, we're going to put that starter back on. Now when you're putting your starter back on, make sure that you get your grounding strap. Otherwise your motor's not going to be grounded and you're going to have a bad time. Alrighty, so that starter is reconnected, and I've reconnected the grounding strap to the top bolt here. Once we finish putting the ignition coil back on, we'll be able to reconnect our battery and go ahead and try starting the motor and working with the clutch to see if it's working correctly. Alrighty, ignition coil is reconnected. Just give it a good looking over here. Plunger is in the slave. Spring is on. You got your bolt reconnected down here. You've got all the bolts on the face here reconnected and tightened. It's very important that they are tight because this face is vital to the operation of your clutch. Ignition coil's back on, starter's back on. Let's go ahead and reconnect that battery and see if the sucker starts up. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and start the car. My tripod is mounted to the side of my car, so you might see a little bit of vibration, but hopefully you'll be able to see when I press the clutch in, this is gonna come out, and this is gonna push in, which will then activate my clutch. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that from inside the car, and we'll see how this goes. At this point, you are all finished. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. Otherwise, enjoy your car and keep motoring on.